Good morning, Warda. How do you follow something like that? Because my heart is absolutely full, and this room is obviously full of heart workers, and it's wonderful to be here. Before we get into this, I think that I was given a theme to consider belonging. And in the beautiful gravitas of that music that we heard, that praise that we were hearing and feeling, there was a sense of joy and hope. There was also a sense of heaviness in the world, and I suppose my conversation with you will get you thinking about a mix and blend of all of that. Some of the words that stood out to me were many, but it talked about setting our hearts on fire. You're doing that every day, and I feel like mine's on fire at the moment about the talk. I think I might just abandon what I might have talked about, I don't know yet. But the other thing that really struck me was about what I was thinking about on the train in this morning. Just as you are. Just as you are. Could you turn to somebody next to you and think about what comes to mind, just as you are, when I say belonging? Could you have a chat for a moment, one moment, and I'll ring the bell. Just as you are, what comes to mind when I say belonging? It's a big thing, there's a lot to talk about. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a slide. I think I did send some photographs. It might magically come up, I'm not sure if it's going to. But we're talking from DARPL. I'm saying we because my colleague and co-lead in DARPL is over there, Leon, and there's many Team DARPL in the room today. I see lots of people. I see lots of people from Trediggerville, St Paul's, where we were yesterday having a conversation which will probably inspire me. I think Langattock might be here. There's lots of other schools. Hi, there's so many more. But DARPL is diversity and anti-racist professional learning. And I think that the word diversity, when we start to explore it in education, and the word inclusion are quite tokenistic unless we blend it with anti-racism. And I think that we need to look beyond the simplicity that we place on the word diversity and inclusion and dive really deep into Cynefin, because here we are in Wales with that opportunity to really explore our anti-racist leadership and to activate and sustain what we strive for in the belonging effect. I'll come back to what you may have talked about there in a moment, but when we're talking about anti-racism, of course we're talking about racism. We're talking about racism in all its guises. And we're talking about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-black racism, and all of the other things that are intermingled with the wonderful work that we do in education, way beyond us in our leadership, in the systems, in the structure and the architecture of our country and our world. When we start to explore DARPL, I think there is an invisible bee. Because actually when we think about diversity and anti-racism, there is a belonging at the heart of that and a sense of Cynefin. And when we were thinking about naming DARPL and the movement that many of us are part of, so Team DARPL goes way beyond Leon and I, we wanted to put the word diversity in there. I think being Mrs. DARPL sounds better than Mrs. Arpel. And I was just thinking about that a bit more this morning, because when we were thinking about just as we are, or just as you are, we were recently doing some research in Swansea. There were 9 schools that we worked with, and we've been doing a collaborative piece of research with the local authority there. They've been doing some fantastic work, like many of you, around anti-racism for some time. A couple of years, some of them. And they were sharing some superb practice. Children learned throughout their career in their schooling that if racism was happening in their community of learning, then something was going to happen about it. They could trust someone to tell someone about it. But what was interesting to me was amongst all of this wonderful work, very visible diversity, there was a sense of belonging that we still need to strive for. And I spoke to a child who told me that her Cynefin wasn't quite here in Wales yet. And I talked about that a little bit in our research, and it's going to be coming out, because what she was talking about was how happy and wonderful the work was and the school was, and she loved her school and her learning community, and she loved playing in a street. But she'd never yet been on the mountain that was visible from the schoolyard. She'd never yet put her bare feet on the sand that was 5 minutes down the road to walk. She didn't have a sense of the land. And I think the way that we use language is really important. I'm putting an emphasis on that because her Cynefin was there, but she told me most of it was still in Jordan. It wasn't quite here yet. It was incomplete. And incomplete Cynefin is something that we can explore, and it was a phrase that my son, his name is Floyd, and I'm a proud mum, he's on the screen, and he did wonderful work during COVID, and he is there with a purple plaque because he did that. But he questioned me when I was writing the Charlotte Williams report with Professor Charlotte, who said, you know, we've got to place Cynefin at the heart. And when I was writing one morning, early one morning, he'd just come in, and he was going to bed and I was getting up, and he said, but the thing is, Mum, Cynefin is not complete for everyone. So we're going to explore that a little bit and think about it's beyond a status. So who am I? Why is that white assumed woman, middle-aged woman, educator up there? What's her position in the context of anti-racism? And I ask you to think about your position in the context of anti-racism. Because if we look around in the context of this room, we see the whiteness in our leadership. We see that actually, is that a pipeline issue? I'd say it's not a pipeline issue. I'd say it's a structural issue. We're just one piece of that structure, but together we've got an amazing, strong voice in leadership. And in future, this room is going to look so much different, isn't it? Because of the legacy of our leadership together. And that really excites me. We heard this morning about humble beginnings and children growing up in poverty, in challenge, in unusual family formations that are not the same maybe as the majority of the class. I was lucky enough, I was blessed enough to grow up in the poorest streets probably in the city. I had the richest childhood because on Angelina Street in the 1970s, we had the whole world on our doorsteps, in our houses. And my grandfather Said came to Wales in 1901 with his 13 names and abandoned most of them because nobody could say them. And that's a thing still in 2026. And he used Ibrahim. And Ibrahim was much more palatable when he changed it to Abraham. He started spelling it Abraham. He wrote it as Abraham. He got the jobs on the ships as Abraham because it was alphabetical and the jobs were called out alphabetical. And so he married a white Welsh woman. She stayed loyal to her faith and walked up the road to St Mary's Church in Wales school, church, and there's a school there, but she didn't go to that school. There were boarding houses, and his faith, there were no mosques in Wales at the time. The conversation that we had it was like a tea party in St Paul's Church in Wales School yesterday, and you shared your story about your family and the mix of faith, and that spoke to my heart. And so it's really important when we're thinking about this work that we keep a sense of ourselves, that we work in our gwaith calon, our hearts work, because this is really serious stuff. And my son never learned in the whole time that he was in school that an educator could look like him. He didn't learn that an artist or a musician or a really strong, kind man, like his father with his booming Jamaican accent, could be like that. He didn't learn that at school. But we have a different sense. So in 2021, when I was the chair's brief with Professor Charlotte Williams, I did that with all of that experience as a granddaughter, as a wife, as a mother, etc., but also as an alumni of Mrs. Campbell. Mrs. Betty Campbell was my classroom teacher, my head teacher, and she took me by the hand to make sure I got to school. And in that clip there, which was sent to me unexpectedly when they raised the statue, which is just by there I was in a leotard with a cat mask and a witch's hat, and she lifted the mask off me and all of my friends. It came on WhatsApp. I nearly fell to the floor because as a child I had hardly any pictures of myself, right? And so she said, I wonder if it is Chantal. They all went hysterical and clapped and everything like as if they didn't know it was me behind the mask, but everyone else was dressed normally. I think she found me on the street in the garden and just said, come on, we're going to school now, because that's what used to happen. She used to do that in Saturday school for years, and she was on my shoulder as well as a granddaughter who was also part of Team DARPL, because when we were working more in media, she said, no, you're going to be working in education. So you might find me sometimes stood by the statue, because if someone's walking past at the same time as me, I run Saturday school, so we're going to have one later. Because the statue is amazing, and actually St. Mary's Church in Wales church is there on the statue. And there's so many stories intricate in that. Mrs. Campbell stands there with a look of expectation. It's 2026, right? And yes, so Grandpa Said was prolific in the 1919 race riots. Like, little man caused absolute havoc. But also, you know, there was a weird thing in Tiger Bay. Tiger Bay is in me, it's in my genetics. There's a weird thing though, because there was Islam, there was Christian faith, there was also a gambling room at the back of the house, if I'm honest. There was lots of things going on in those boarding houses because they had the whole world, one whole world in a mile. And then a few generations on, I'm the child of the 70s within that. You can't describe the richness of that brings. But I think we've got to go beyond the nostalgia of that and think about what we can do with that legacy of knowledge. Mrs. Campbell, Grandpa Said, all of those people didn't have the optimal golden time that we have. What is the legacy of our leadership going to be? Because I'm a seed, you know, one of the acorns of that statue that we see. That's me, telling her story, telling Grandpa Said's story. So what's going to be ours? We've got an action plan, the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. It says we're going to be an anti-racist nation by 2030. I want to ask you a question moment, and we're going to work towards that, and I know that all of us in here are working towards an amazing curriculum for Wales, but we can't realise the curriculum for Wales unless we explore this. Professor Donaldson said that, who and what is school for? And we went into a space, Professor Charlotte and I, and you know, they told us that 67 people were going to be in the audience. They left the 0 off the email, and I didn't have my 670 people's shoes on either. So I went on the stage, and there was Professor Donaldson saying we need to do this. But we're not far away. We're 4 years away, less than 4 years away from 2030. Are we going to be an anti-racist nation by 2030? If we are going to be an anti-racist nation by 2030, I want us to sit down. If we are going to be somewhere in between, then I want us to put our hands up. And if we're going to be staying where we are, then I want us to stand up. Or maybe I'll change that. If we're going to be somewhere in between, I want us to stand up. If I want to say, if we're going to be, you know, stagnant, we're not going to be anywhere near that, then we're going to stay sitting down. And if we're somewhere in between, put our hands up. the other one is, yeah. Okay. Is where we are. So, over to you. If you can make sense of those instructions. Okay. I think it's something to think about and talk about. You can all sit back down now, thank you. So most of us in the room are saying that we're going to be somewhere in between where we are now and getting to an anti-racist nation. So we're not going to be getting to an anti-racist nation completely. But within our learning communities, when we're exploring belonging and we're really thinking about that, then I think that we can get so much closer. And I think that we've made some amazing step change and going forward. So exploring diversity is just a starting point. When we start to move deeper into using Cynefin as a framework, we can start to better understand its complexity in context and in its beauty. I wonder if switching on our anti-racist leadership lens really creates the conditions and turns up the volume for genuine belonging, complete belonging, unusual belonging, beyond traditional belonging. What does that mean? And where are our learners and our staff feeling valued and able to contribute fully? When you were talking about your just as you are belonging, whose conversation turned to staff? A few people. Whose conversation turned straight to children? And lots of them, I wonder if it stayed close to you and thinking about where we are. So in the conversations with the children and their families in Swansea, it was amazing to see the fantastic work that's going on. But what we were hearing as a positive undercurrent was, but it's not quite enough yet. There's still so much more to do. And honestly, these schools are DARPLing deep and wonderfully. But when I asked one of the children who's 8, and any child between 6 and 8 has like shaped me in my career, they're amazing when you talk with them. I said to her, where do you see? And there was amazing work everywhere. I mean, my heart was full. When I went into this school particularly, there was a conversation in the lobby. There was something happening in the car park. I could just feel the palpableness of the inclusivity in its true sense, because we overuse that word. But when I said to her, where do you see yourself in your curriculum? She said, me. And I said, yeah. And she said, not yet, not quite. And I said, why? And she talked about her story, her language, a twist on her faith and her positioning and her heritage, and she had so much more to share. And I just thought there's so much to do. And when we start thinking about learning and teaching a lot more, then we can just keep going, because it's forever, it's a continuum. And I think when we're exploring anti-racism, and some of you who are DARPLing with us deep and long, that's wonderful, but some of you may not have started your deep journey with us yet, and we'd love you to be part of that. I think let's pause on that for a bit. It is not just the children, it is the staff and our families and our communities, and we do need to spend more time thinking about belonging, because to achieve a curriculum of belonging, it's not just an aspiration, it's a community-led approach in everyday experience shaped by our leadership. So who in your school is really leading the emotional labour of belonging? Who is that you? Our purpose is not the stuff that we do. It's the things that happen when we do what we do. So thinking about my teacher, Mrs. Campbell, there's other people on there. There's Dr. Kevin Palmer, who was great. So at the time the Charlotte Williams report came out, and some people still haven't read that, but it came out in 2021, and one of the most famous recommendations, and 51 were upheld, was that we as a nation are going to teach Black, Asian and minority ethnic perspectives, contributions, histories, and it was going to be mandatory for us to do that. There were 36,000 teachers in Wales at the time, and only 1,066 of them were coming from global majority heritage. They probably didn't have a curriculum like mine in the 70s, so there was a lot of unlearning, and there's a lot of learning about why to do that. And I think there's still a lot of that. So I thought about the anti-racist professional learning, and that's the crux of it, because we can't decolonise anything. I think we start thinking about, in the world of education, decolonising our curriculum, decolonising it, or by the end of this academic year we're going to decolonise our curriculum. But are we actually thinking then about the wider world? How real is that in the context of our personal perspective as a human, and our human connectedness and in our curriculum for the world? For example, if we think about the diversity or the lack of diversity in some parts of Wales, in some parts of Wales we could be doing amazing work in the curriculum, in the hidden curriculum, in outreach, and yet 60, 70, 90+% of schools could be with families from global majority heritage. And yes, we do wonderful work within the learning and teaching, but what does our leadership look like? How white is that leadership? And what are we doing to change the pipeline of the future? Because that's really important, because it's the pipeline, not a problem. Remember I said at the start, it's a structural thing. A curriculum of belonging then moves way beyond statements, and it goes back into that really deep heart work that requires action and a shift from surface level representation to intentional anti-racist leadership. And where do you fit with that confidence? Because when Professor Charlotte and I were talking about this, I said, they don't know how and why they're going to do that. There's 36,000 teachers, and it has to be the whole education system, and all its tiers needs to explore this. So I knocked on Welsh Government door the next morning because I couldn't sleep. And my husband, who talks about this in a real context, because I haven't spoken about my husband yet, but true belonging is a spiritual practice. It's believing and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world. Loving being part of a community, loving standing alone or walking alone or going anywhere confidently, and being who we are in a fullness. But actually, what he realised, he moved from, we had a holiday romance. We met, and we eventually 7 years later got married in his grandfather's church, because his grandfather was a preacher, and that happened in Jamaica, but there was a lot of the world in those 7 years. And he left Jamaica when he was 28. He was migrating at the time I met him, so I caught him just in time. And then eventually he fell in love with Wales. And the reason he fell in love with Wales was he liked the intermingling of faith, because he's interested in the Rastafari perspective and other things, but he grew up in a Christian home. His grandfather was an amazing preacher who built lots of churches. And when he came to Wales, he loved the mix and blend of faith and music and food, right? Because the Malaysian food mixed with the Jamaican food is, wow, my son is a chef and it's just gorgeous. He calls Cardiff Yardif because he mixes and blends all of that. But Pabs, or Paul, Pablo P, his DJ name, and all of the other types of layers of him, he said to me one day in the kitchen, but I've realised, Shan, I'm not just a man anymore. I'm a black man. I'm an ethnic minority. Language is powerful, and what feelings they possess. So you've heard me band around a few words like global majority heritage. My son, who was the one who challenged me about Cynefin, asked me about, well, what about incomplete Cynefin? Because it's not complete for everyone, for some of these reasons. And you know, he's experienced, I'm fed up and sick and tired of being proud of his extra kindness, his extra resilience, and all of those things that he has in his humanity, because he's a strong, young black man who's proud of his Welshness, who loves Wales, and actually, he's got strong value on his Jamaicanness, he's got strong value on his Malaysianness, and I don't want him to pipe that down, but sometimes I find myself whispering, you know, keep that volume down, because it's not fully safe. And he questioned me about something, because he was doing his accountancy degree, and you know, he's a clockwork man, she wind him up, and he fizzles out because he gets bored and he wants to do something else. And he slammed his laptop shut and he said, I'm not doing that anymore. And I said, what now? You know, the degree or whatever it is. And he said, ethnic minority, I'm not writing that anymore. All minority ethnic. So I said, right, okay. Because he's a maths man and he was doing his accountancy at the time, and no, he's not doing that anymore, but he was. And he said, I'm going to write global majority heritage. And I said, right, but you know you didn't actually come up with that. He said, well, yes, I did, just then. And I said, well, no, you didn't actually, because there's a woman, an academic, who's written about it, and her name is Rosemary Campbell-Stephens. And actually, I went to a birthday party a couple of weeks ago. She comes from the same parish in Jamaica and has a house down the road from our family home. There's so much connectivity, but language is powerful, because to him, and in our household, and it's not a perfect term, because people will feel excluded by the term global majority heritage. He likes dual heritage. Jewel as in the treasure, not in jewel, because he's got more than two. And Dr. Gaynor Legall is a dear friend and a wonderful champion in our community, and she quotes Floyd on that dual heritage thing. There's so many things, I can't even go into all of this that I've got written down here that I wanted us to talk to. But I think that, you know, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Maya Angelou talked about that. And I think that we have got some stories missing from some of the curriculums of belonging that we're striving for. Talk with your communities, talk with your learners, talk with your staff, so much more. We've got issues that came up in Professor Charlotte's report. Interpretation, implementation of that. And Dr. Kevin Palmer answered the door and said, yes, let's do something about professional learning in anti-racism. Let's explore that why. And wherever you are in your journey, please let's DARPL with you more. I'd love to do that. And we're thinking about this and the message that we, as a values-led group of leaders, can impact the rest of the church, the rest of the schools in Wales, because we're 10% of that. Interpretation and implementation of the report was really problematic. The salience and engagement. How do we help it feel meaningful when schools don't think that anti-racism applies to them and their community? What if my community is not that visibly diverse? What if we haven't got, do we need to think about racism here? Do we need to explore anti-racism? We have to think about that in the big picture of the world, and there's so much to explore about our confidence and competence in anti-racism and the Cynefin principle. In belonging, we have to move beyond the status quo to reformulate, and we can't think about the nostalgia in our own childhood without thinking about our own belonging. But we have some missing stories, I think, in the curriculum for Wales, and it's exciting when we start to explore that beyond into that. I think that some of the things that we can do is we can probe more and explore and find out what we can do in this sense, hear, feel and know more, and then respond. Because Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs. And we can see that, can't we? The hierarchy of needs. I don't know if we all know that actually he probably didn't just borrow, he stole that idea. He stole it and doesn't reference the Indigenous community that he spent months and months and months. So whilst we all know Maslow's theory, do we all know where it really came from? The knowledge and the amazing opportunity it brings us. And I think that maybe his interpretation, that's just me, is a little bit skewed. Because I think if we think about that hierarchy of needs, it's absolutely vital in the work that we do in education. But let's explore that. Let's turn that on its head. Let's start with self-actualization rather than it being the end goal. Because I think that we could be on to something. I think there's so much to do. I would like to invite you to come and DARPL with us. I would like you to be DARPLers. I would like you to be DARPLing. I would like you to have some fun with us, because there's amazing opportunities for learning. It's exciting beyond today that nothing will be the same, because Lisa has spent the time and the energy working with you as a team to bring us all together. So if Wales was the same tomorrow, with all of our leadership spilling out into that, today might be a bit of a waste. So I'm really excited about what tomorrow brings, because the volume of our leadership and the collectiveness amongst us is really exciting. We've got a colourful landscape, realising the full potential of our leadership and our legacy of leaders is really, really exciting. So I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward to all the learning that we're doing today. I think it's really exciting when we start to think about a sense of belonging, Cynefin, Hiraeth and Gwaith Calon together. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.